Coming up, Mr. Hughes signs autographs with a fire extinguisher, Jack has to stay late and repaint the plough, and Adam recovers yet another vehicle.
Using the bucket. And then in true Frog style, that vehicle broke down, and then a Challenger gun tank had to take over with gun to the rear and just ram the wall down. When it did work, it was okay. It could shift muck and do jobs. It was amphibious when it was properly sealed, so there's not going to be an in-place force. The bridge ain't going to break out. We're going to talk about it. That will let you get across an obstacle with pretty much something up to a challenge to in the kind of way that you would see it in their rack. So it's really heavy and really capable of being there. The bridge itself is an interesting engineering. It's made out of a 222 alpha, a specialist alloy developed in Britain by the military engineering experimentation establishment. And that's a really high strength alloy that allows the bridge to perform so well and do the service. Slowly, if you look to your left, you'll see a decent armoured vehicle Royal Engineers, sort of Avery coming around. That big bundle of pipes on top of it is a Matthews series. So again, this is pretty cool, and I don't think these vehicles would have been seen together since the mine marking poles yet they've been put out. Representative of Harborough. Very, very dangerous. There was discussion really in the armoured engineer squadrons and the Avery, the AdLab running up and using Bangalore torpedoes rather than armour to flee through wire obstacles and get them off. So it really is impactful time and time again. It has had a really significant impact on the battlefield. So the AdLab has disengaged from the bridge. It looks like it's gone firm. And what you've got now is the CBRTs crossing the bridge. They then go on to that second obstacle. So again, if you look at the bridge and to the left of the bridge, about quarter axis, you'll see a second obstacle denoted by those 4 orange mine marking poles. Obstacles often on the battlefield, when they're constructed by people, are constructed in layers. And again, we can use Ukraine as a very good example. Down in that area in the southeast of Ukraine, it's very complicated. So what you've got coming forwards now is an Avery, so an armoured vehicle Royal Engineer. Again, based on a Chieftain, and on top of that you've got a Maxi C, so that's going to move forwards and deploy that. Both the AdLab and Avery you'll see here were converted from Chieftain by a company called Vickers, a very, very good company, sadly no longer with us. that were based in Newcastle, this ginormous factory called the Armstrong Works on the banks of the Tyne. Prior to the Vickers Abbey, which is about to cross the bridge in front of us, a gentleman called Dave Clegg, who finished as a captain, and a friend of mine in the Royal Engineers back in the day at Woolwich, he actually assisted in just taking turrets off gun tanks and then climbing on kind of improvised cameras and improvised engineer equipment. So the Royal Engineers, one version, the Woolwich Abbey, were actually just built in workshops rather than in special tank factories. Again, if this was for real, with people shooting at you, you would really go in for it, working that Abbey hard. But here we are today on a sunny day in East Tyne in Harborough, and the vehicle there is under kind of ground control by Jack and being guided on to get that scene into the right space. It is a very dangerous sport, armoured engineering. Here we are doing it in a very controlled way, controlled environment, managing the risk. But when you are training for war, you probably have a think through getting my time to getting accidents, falling off bridges, vehicles falling off bridges into water, capsizing in water. Thankfully, no one killed or injured, everyone got out and died. But imagine at night going over that bridge, back down, and you fall off. It's very dangerous. At war, on kind of in service, the scene would have been launched into these things called explosive bolts or blowout pins. The blowout pins would secure the scene to the top of the Abbey, and when the Abbey arrived at the gap, the blowout pins would go on, the brakes get slammed on, and the scene would roll into the gap. Very technical. Got it over that gap, tap the brakes, the scene in the gap, on the Terrier and the Trojan. You'll see that the fascine has dropped into the hole of that hamper there. A much slower process than putting that through and moving forwards. The fascine in the gap, up and over, and the beauty of the fascine, as you can see there, is those pipes of Abbey and Ablab since 2008. Those members of Green that were attached representative of Chieftain Abbey on service in the former Yugoslavia, and then He's important to the battlefield. As discussed in D-Day, he saw risks around vehicles on Woolwich, and they averaged using vehicle engineers were absolutely critical in breaking out Woolwich, really order, we were given a really successful operation, and pivotal to these vehicles. The American arms did not have these vehicles, and perhaps it did, it was seen as losses to the average, so we had to get hospitals more quicker. The vehicles themselves are really complicated vehicles. As I said, the original capacity of the vehicle, the light of these plants, which is a really technical thing. It demands on improved release, really technical device. There's really special using the working, originally the skill set of Joe Gack and the rest of the team. So the process so common there's a process that is on vehicle, you know, using quite warm, but again, very technical vehicle, the vehicle is packaging, and really, it's good to see it used, it's great, that's a big part of the packaging, for that vehicle to go and see it used and see it there. You'll see obviously a right on the rear, 0 Rangers, right flying behind, probably fine, so maybe Rangers team, and just vehicles in the middle, and those Rangers like, goes around side of the rear, and there's 60 guys there. We also have facilities on reserve Rangers here, so again, also guys, go down and more on vehicles on the insert.
Turrets on the top of the 432, and it became for Britain technically our first infantry fighting vehicle. 432 was, earlier we used to call it an APC, an armoured personnel carrier. The Army loves abbreviations. Armoured personnel carrier, section of infantry in the back. This was a battle taxi to take you to where the fighting was going on and drop the soldiers off. So the idea there was they didn't fight from inside the vehicle, but the idea with the crane is though it could actually lift a Chieftain power pack and actually be able to swap that out in the field, because as we've heard already, the Chieftain was a fairly unreliable vehicle and sadly had an awful lot of breakdowns over its service life. So 432's going around, but we've also got the Abbott, and and if you see it going around, like we said earlier, everything that looks like a tank is not necessarily a tank. It's got the same engine and running gear as a 432, but it's got a 105mm howitzer on the top, a different range of shells to fire, but different bag charges to change the distance those range that the shells would be fired. Now you can see it going past us at the moment. It's got its gun in a cradle. It would normally drive that in a lock. When it's ready to deploy, that gun will raise right up in the air. It can actually do a very high angle, and it can fire off about 6 to 8 rounds a minute, which is a fair old rate of fire. And the idea being, well, it's only got about 40 rounds to be able to replenish it in action. And the idea being mobile artillery, that Abbott, and by the way, we name all our self-propelled artillery after ecclesiastical positions. So you've got sexton there, we had priest, we've got abbot, there was something called deacon in World War II as well. But the idea, but there's other variants, and you'll see they're going past. We've got sabre and scimitar with a 30mm Raden cannon put on the top there. And again, that 30mm Raden tank, because it's to Belgium, they actually made CVRT in Belgium as well. And there's still a lot of these out there in all sorts of different variants. So we had Striker, Spartan, which was the armoured personnel variant, Samaritan, which was the ambulance variant, on that welded aluminium hull that they had. And it went out of service with the British Army, or do we want wheeled armour for reconnaissance? And sometimes they used both in service at the same time. Wheels, quicker, very good on the road, much more mobile, goes on for longer, tracked, great for getting to places wheels can't always get to. And there's times the idea of the light tank effect. In other words, Scorpion, Sabre, Scimitar, they really look like a war-fighting vehicle that can do some damage. Tracks also, I mentioned earlier, psychological impact. That's why we didn't take tracked vehicles to Northern Ireland. But they were considered too warlike to be used in the Troubles. Sort of psychological impact. If you've got to using tracks on the streets of Britain, it felt like we'd gone a bit too far. I mentioned earlier, most of the CVRT family was powered by a Jaguar car engine, slightly altered from the famous E-Type Jaguar. It was about the only size engine with enough power they could get that fitted in the space in the front of the vehicle down the side of the driver. They were trying to keep the weight down, not just to make it air portable, but under the track of that vehicle, the ground pressure is actually less than the weight of a human foot. And famously in the Falklands campaign, when they took some of the Scorpions and CVRT family out to the Falklands, one of them parked on what they thought was ground. It actually turned out to be a frozen bog. And the vehicle, because its track spread straight through the ice, because the ground pressure beneath his feet was that much more. So it's how clever a track can be to lessen the weight of a vehicle going over soft ground. You'll also notice with CVRT and the 432s, they've all got rubber track pads on them, touching the ground, not a rubber pad in between. And the danger is there with raw metal. Amazingly enough, like so many of these things, there's probably more now running in private hands for longer than there were when they were in the army. The army has a tendency, you have two speeds and either dead slow and flat out. And of course, these are toys to be used for the military, whereas in private system, and when you think that some of these vehicles, when you're getting into the many tens of tons, you've really got to be careful. And again, in the Second World War, and even today, where they're actually towing some bigger, heavier tanks. It's a British gun on it, that famous L7 105mm gun. You've got a cast armoured turret. It's quite a narrow tank, and that's because it was going to have to drive up mountain road. We've got here the Gepard. This is, again, it's a version of the Leopard. We've got a Centurion driving by that's in the process of restoration. So it's funny how a Centurion, an interest, they may have a very good anti-drone capability. So again, we're back to the stage where certain weapon systems, they have a second life because a new threat comes along. Some Gepards have also been sent out. M8 goes into service in about 1950, and they towed with them those long Tom 155 artillery pieces, but also anti-aircraft guns. The West German Army in 1955, NATO realises we're going to need the skills and the manpower of West Germany to help defend, so they reformed the Bundeswehr. They used some famous Wehrmacht officers from the Second World War to help reform their military, and they also used some of the tank designers from World War, and they thought that the speed would be the better way of protecting themselves on the battlefield. Now the whopping American flag there is being flown. The Americans basically after World War II have lost interest in tanks. They know they've got a very impressive strategic air force, they've got nuclear weapons now, will they really need tanks ever again? And then of course what happens is 1950, the Korean War kicks off, and literally American World War II tanks have been taken off plinths to be sent out to fight in Korea. And that gets them, jump-starts their tank program again with the M47, the still with Turkey, with Greece. Some of them are Greeks been exporting some with holes cut in them. Not so it can float, it's so if it drives over a mine, the blast of the mine is vented up the sides of the vehicle, so it's got like a rounded or a V-shaped hull. What you don't want if you drive over a big mine is all the blast of the mine to be captured underneath the belly of your vehicle, because that could flip you over, which was not what you want. A lot of ways of improving the vehicles, new engines, new sighting systems, etc. Now you can see how mobile those Leopards are. Relatively light tank compared to other NATO tanks in service. But a very powerful MTU diesel engine to keep it going. Now, we've been joined in the arena by what a lot of these tanks we've been seeing we're going to go up against. The famous Soviet, this one's a T-72, and I think somewhere we might see a T-54, T-55. It's building this very sophisticated bit of kit. Now if you look at it, you can see, number one, it's low profile, so you're harder for the enemy to pick up. It's got a 125mm gun on it, and it's what's called a smoothbore gun, so it's basically a long tube, not rifling to spin the round. And that means that whopping great long tube can actually fire missiles out the end of it as well, so it has multiple capabilities.
4, 3, 2.
Well, that looks to me very clear winners there. The two in the front are the two Leopards. T72. I can't see through the dust what's going on over the back there. What do we got? We got the PZ68, the M60. I think this is only one heat. I think there's more to go. Called the T44, but decided to carry on just improving the T80, T3485, which was the famous wartime tank. But it's got that classic frying pan shaped turret. It went on in service longer than it was expected to, and even when we brought in new tanks like Challenger 1, Chieftain was there in the background to still make up the tank fleet. And even though we always talk about the engine a lot, in fact Chieftain was a very successful tank in the sense it had by far the thickest armour than any of its contemporaries in NATO at the time, and in its service life it was up-armoured. When there was the opportunity of looking at what the Soviet T-64 gun, a 150mm gun, had done to similar vehicles to the Chieftain that we've sold into the Middle East, there was a desire in Britain to thicken the armour. We're very conscious. The most precious thing about that tank is its crew. So British tank crews always go into action knowing they've probably got the tank with the best level of protection on it. So when the Russians came out with a bigger tank gun, on the T-64, we added more armour protection to the Chieftain. So you'll see most of these tanks have got what's called Stillbrew armour round the side of the turret. Towards the end of Chieftain's life, they added something called TOGS, Thermal Observation and Gunnery. That was put on the side, a new way of looking at the enemy. Basically, you were looking at the heat signature of the enemy's tank, not through a telescope or periscope to look at it that way. And that also meant tanks, once they had TOGS added, that meant Chieftain would fire at night just as effectively as it could during the day. Now those shrouds, what look like canvas, asbestos lining, all the way, kinetic energy behind that metal dart will smash its way through enemy armour, quite often all the way through one side and out the other, and it creates a vacuum behind it. So basically anything malleable, a wooden block on the front for pushing off landing craft. It can go into about 6 metres of water. It's sealed up. Normally on there would be a crew from REME, at least one would be a diver, so he could actually go under. Baths like this Centurion, about a dozen of them done. There's still a number of them left, some in private ownership, some in museums collection. Number down to the Falklands, and they were carried on HMS Fearless, and they were used in their original role, you know, pushing off landing craft. So we took that on service instead. Well, you have to say, for a vehicle that was first put together in 1950, the Centurion ARV there is doing really rather well.
And then we'll just talk a little bit about the Jeeps that are coming by. As you can see, there are a lot of them. That's Matt waving there. So actually there are two types of Jeep. They all look the same. None of you will be able to tell from here, I can't tell from here, whether they are a Ford manufactured Jeep or a Willis manufactured Jeep. If you're really keen, as you get closer, you can tell, but it really is a bit of an expertise. You have to kind of look inside to work out whether it's a Ford or a Willis Jeep. The easy way for the uneducated is there's a plaque just below the windscreen on the right hand side which will tell you. So it's written on there. Obviously they made hundreds of thousands of Jeep during the war, and we think there's probably about 5,000 or 6,000 of them in the UK alone still being driven and enjoyed by private ownership. If you're thinking about it, that's my family going by there waving madly. Hello, in my Jeep. If you're thinking of buying a Jeep, you're looking at £28,000 to start you off. So it's not a cheap hobby, and the parts are consistently going up in price all the time. So this kind of hobby is not for the faint-hearted. But the great thing is you can stick it in the garage and leave it for a year if you haven't got the money or the time or the inclination to do it, and then bring it back and get it going the next year. It's not like a canal boat which has an opportunity to sink. This can just sit in the garage. Going over the flat top there to the left, that is a Series 3 lightweight Land Rover. There are many types of Land Rover, this aircraft once it's landed. There's also a couple of other vehicles going around. You can see apart from the Jeeps, I've seen some Dodges. View on the left-hand side behind the tractor and Bowser. That's actually a Mark 1 ferret. There were many types of Mark of ferret, went up all the way up to Mark 5. The Mark 5, well, if I talk you through them, we know the Mark 1, which would be absolutely terrifying, I would imagine, if you were in it, and the wheels were designed to sort of drive it along as well, so it wasn't quick. They would go forward with a commander and observer in there, and the observer would bring down the artillery fire. And then what you may not realise is that the ferret actually has as many reverse gears as it has forward gears, and it will actually go the same speed forwards as it will backwards. You just pull a lever and then it goes backwards. The idea being that if you, in a forward operating point, you come under fire, with a vehicle like that, you're not going to last long under heavy fire, so you want to get out of there. You'll put a little bit of fire down with your machine gun, and then you stick it in reverse and go back as fast as you can. You never know, somebody might show us that today. I've no idea what the tractor is going by. Looks like it's a John Deere, but that's not my thing. We've got a Jeep here, so this is a keen Jeeper trying to get over this large berm. I think, bearing in mind it's so light and got such a short wheelbase, it's perfectly designed for this sort of activity. There is actually a transfer box inside the Jeep which gives you a high-low ratio, so it's quite likely we're in the low ratio here as we go up. Plenty of grip, and over it goes. Good on them. I'm not sure I'd have done that. So in front of us now, the sort of squat looking, extremely rare, possibly the only one in the country, maybe the only one in the world. They didn't make many Morris ambulances. It's World War II. Most of the ambulances, if you know your thing, were Austin K2s. They were known as Katies. Famous for the picture of the Queen. The Queen used to drive them during the war. There's a picture of her standing in front of an Austin K2. That's actually a Morris ambulance, made by Morris. They didn't make as many. And it's absolutely wonderful to see that here today because of its rarity. And Mary absolutely loves it. She's restored it lovingly, and it's a great job. So coming past here is a Dodge Command car with a little flag up. That's an MVT flag by the looks of it, yeah. That's what we call the oversized Jeep. So if you like the Jeep but you want a bit more comfort and spend a bit more money, you buy yourself a Dodge WC56, which is what that is. There's a huge seat along the back and a big map table, and it's designed for commanders in the battlefield. So when you sit in that, you do feel like royalty, particularly when the roof's down. It's an absolutely superb bit of kit, will go anywhere, and the generals in the US Army absolutely love them. So there is a slightly different looking Jeep here going past. With on the back it's got the radio mast. That's actually an M151 Mutt, and it is a Vietnam Jeep essentially. It was not the exact replacement to the Jeep because there were a couple of other versions of the Willys Jeep between that and the Mutt. But the Mutt was extremely popular, air portable, very light, and could go anywhere. They're quite unusual in the collector's market. But those people are into the and hope like hell it's going to make it. As you can see, that's exactly what that person has just done. Just put your foot down and over it goes. They're amazingly versatile, even though they're quite wide. And a lot of that is just down to the power of the engine, which is just huge. A lot of fun to drive a Humvee. And even though they look like they're about 10 foot wide, the actual steering position where the driver sits is really small. And when you sit there, there's about 4 feet of gearbox where they put the radio systems between you and the person next to you. You couldn't touch them, they're that far away. So you'd imagine that there's a huge amount of space in there to drive. Without winch. So the command car behind it, the 56, did come with a winch, and that was a Dodge WC57. There are many other Dodges. There's a 61 and a 62. We haven't got them out there, which is 6-wheeled. And they're really versatile and great to own because you've got plenty of space in the back to sleep or carry all your kits and your camping kit and stuff like that. Still don't know what the tractor is, but I'll find out in a minute. Apparently it's a 7710. Well, there you go, you see. You learn everything. We learn everything here, don't we? So the Foden 6-wheeler here, this is a British vehicle used in the 60s and 70s. Highly versatile 6-wheel vehicle. This is very, very capable. Ambulance going round. It's a Bedford RL. You may well know them as being the Green Goddess, and those of you that are old enough will remember when the fireman strikes were on, the army would be recruited to come out and they would be driving these Green Goddesses. They were green. This one's actually sand coloured because it's actually it's one that was used in Saudi Arabia. Firemen were on strike and the army used to come out in these things. They were ill-equipped, poor to do the job. They didn't have I'm sure we're all watching that lightweight going on. See, very versatile. So the RL Green Goddesses, they were used during the firemen's strikes. As I say, they weren't really up to the job. When you filled them with water, they don't actually have baffles in them, and they would often roll over when they were going round roundabouts. And when you've got the army guys in them, they didn't really mind whether they were going to get to the fire. So if you're thinking of buying one of these, as I say, all of these are privately owned. You can go onto the internet and buy them. There's 2 real places where you might look. So get your pen and paper out. Millweb.net is probably the main place to be looking for your second-hand military vehicle. You can buy everything there from a bicycle, a gun, a piece of artillery, a tank, or Jeeps or Land Rovers. It is the main place to go. The website's like in the 1980s. You have to find your way around it, but once you found the vehicles, there's some really cool stuff there. Quite addictive, I find, and you can access that freely. So if you feel like you want to get into the mood and start just driving round around a dusty field on your off weekends, that would be a good place to start. Or if you don't feel like it, or perhaps can't afford it, then just join the MVT anyway. You can meet the members, and they will then take you out and around the field as they're doing with a lot of people here. We see the Foden now on the left going up. The actual cab of the Green Goddess is made of wood. And when you're inside it, it's a bit like being in a garden shed. Because it's all open. There's a sort of bench seat at the back for the troops, and then the 2 seats at the front for the driver and the sort of the leader. But it is very spacious inside. It's really quite strange. I'm assuming sort of repairing vehicles is all part of the hobby, but you don't have to do it on your own. MVT members help each other out, particularly where there's expertise that you might not have. We have a lot of people who are mechanics in the club, and you know, if you've got a problem, they'll all pile in and help out, get it sorted and get it back on the road, which is an important part of what we do as a charity about keeping the mechanical veterans alive. So you'll notice my Jeep going by there. It's got a winch on the front. On the front of that, they made very few of them, and if you find another one at the show here today, let me know, because they're quite unusual. They did fit some of them with the capstan winches, which drove straight off the front of the engine. and used them for basically self-recovery and recovery of other Jeeps. I've never used mine because mine was serving, served in Greece, and then once it was demobbed, it was actually
building with materials. Again, it's another one that we sometimes forget. Britain post World War II were bankrupt. We don't have much in the way of money, and we don't have materials. You know, rationing goes on into the mid-1950s for Britain. So when Maurice Wilks looks at building the Land Rover, he's purposely doing it using material he knew was available. Steel was still, in essence, rationed, so he uses aluminium, surplus from the aircraft industry. We're not building quite as many planes. So that's why the Land Rover story, really interesting one that comes together, and we start by having, at one moment, we had the Jeep in service in the early 1950s, lots of post-war Jeeps still going. Hercules, we were withdrawing from Empire, but we still had commitments around the world. Instead of basing troops places, could we fly them out there quickly? Hence places like Malaya. We gave it a bit of punch with a 76mm gun. The only engine they could find to fit that little light vehicle was the engine from the Jaguar E-Type sports car. And so that ended up, the petrol engine there, just about the right size to fit down the side by the driver there. So, and a whole family of vehicles ago. So we've got that there we are, we've got the Ferret going around. Mark 1 without the turret, Mark 2 with the turret on the top with the Browning machine gun in. And you can see the driver at the moment, he's driving around with his little hatches open so he can see out, comes under fire at all, those hatches close down, and he looks out a glass periscopes or whatever wherever he's going that way. Browning machine gun on the top, later they replace that with a GPMG, really for a bit of self-defense. The big issue with so much of defence procurement, they've got to learn the lesson of not just putting off a decision, but actually finally getting to a decision somewhere, so the budget can actually still buy you something rather than it's just ended up going off on trials or being decimated by it. A whole family of vehicles, again built, sold to many countries. Switzerland carrying, looks like it might be built on a manned track chassis there, but again you can see the high ab cranes on the top. And we've got some of these lovely, got an obvious use as GMCs, trucks could go into the civilian sector for a number of years till the spares run out. But other vehicles, mainly armour, very little you can do with an armoured vehicle. You can cut the armour off, maybe use some chassis. They did try ground nuts, didn't work at all, and millions were wasted. And again in Australia they took some tanks and tried to use those for clearing forests and that, so there's a number of those chassis and turrets taken off the wall back. Very rare to find it used, as I mentioned, with vehicle. And there's that Dingo, wonderful independent suspension going over the mound with the sandy coloured Ferret. That was its successor. We've got, what else have we got there? Berlioz recovery crane, French, again sold to a number of companies. Post World War II we were in competition. France starts its arms industry. America gave away a lot of stuff for free to help reform various militaries around Europe. But when it comes to buying stuff, it's Britain and France were in competition. French selling their little light AMX-13 tank, they're trying to get in the marketplace. We're trying to sell the Centurion tank, and then later CVRT, like we can see on the back of the drops truck there. Good international sales with CVRT still in operation around the world. A whole family built with that same suspension, that same engine system. Later in British Army service they dieselised the fleet, so they put a diesel engine in. The idea there, the British Army went to a one fuel policy. We didn't want petrol engines, we only wanted one fuel. Obvious reasons. Number one, diesel is harder to set on fire, so it gives you a little bit more time to get out of trouble if your vehicle catches fire. And also the obvious other one, if you've got a one fuel policy, you can't put the wrong fuel type in your vehicle and ruin the engine. Now you know that causes major arguments in civilian life. If someone goes and does that to the family car, imagine what your NCO is going to say to you if you put petrol in a diesel tank in the middle of the night in the dark, or diesel in a petrol tank. So having one fuel policy, that's still the British Army's policy at the moment, even at the same time they're testing now electric vehicles. Other vehicles military's going to use, things we don't think about, road rollers there. We've got vehicles driving around. If you're having to recreate roads, you're going to have to go through bombed areas, laying out runways on emergencies. You're going to need all that grading equipment, that road rolling equipment that you see in civilian life. Quite often, sometimes they take things into service just possibly ability. Other times, for understanding Robin Reliant, no, this is a joke vehicle that was put together by a wonderful guy who lives down in Sussex. He did a wonderful version of what a Robin Reliant might be look like if the military got engaged in it. Tracked at the back, dummy 50 caliber, and actually made to float as well. Huge tank transporter, that's one of the Oshkosh family. The Americans, Britain bought the Oshkosh transporters after retiring its Scammells and its Foden, its different size tank transporters. W, wheeled for wheels, same time as Scorpion. So the wheeled idea, quieter like I mentioned. They gave it a turret with a 30 minute... What the Russian ambassadors said at the time, these were tanks that kept the Red Army fighting while they were moving their own tank factories. It was only after the war that the politics meant that it wasn't a good idea that a good communist country, the Soviet Union, was relying on Western capitalism to keep it going at the time. So we see that lovely road roller going along there. As I mentioned, simple vehicle, lightweight vehicles introduced along with quads for the quads were used actually Afghanistan, Iraq areas where again anything that would take you across country, off-road, maybe a little bit of protection, a roll cage on top, and the British military like using them. And again, already some of those have been passed on to other countries, sold on. Those Soviet vehicles made in satellite countries afterwards, sometimes to slightly different build standards. Certainly with armour, if you built a T-72 tank in Poland or Czechoslovakia, it had slightly different armour spec, tends to be a bit weaker than those versions built in the Soviet Union or Russia. December 1914 was in position. You were not able to be able to drive those, certainly on the Western Front, but again you can see they had a whale of a time with wheeled, two-wheeled and four-wheel vehicles on some of the other battlefronts, such as the Middle East, again in places like North Africa, the Rolls-Royce petrol engines. Ferrets, like all these Rolls-Royce B60s, B80 engines, very thirsty, so the mileage, if you can replace with a diesel, you tend to be able to get a bit further. And there we can see the, I think the Foden is it there going along, pulling the Berlioz, the recovery vehicle behind it. Now we've got an in-service vehicle coming on. British Army again specifically for use out in Afghanistan and Iraq. We were looking at vehicles with good visibility and good road crossing capabilities, and specifically with that particular part of the world in mind where there was a lot of roadside bombs, rough terrain. You wanted to try and go across country. The 3 armoured regiments that we've still got in service with Challenger 2 before Challenger 3 comes along any time, we hope in the next few years. Radial engine in the back, that's why you can hear that engine there. Big round, it's got to be high at the back because it's an aeroplane engine, hence the height of the vehicle. You'll see with the chassis that follows it, bigger gun. It's a 75mm gun, recoil system, so that when it goes bang, it doesn't basically, well, it doesn't knock the plane out the sky, but they put it on this engine carrying. What they do, they give an excellent hand. If you look at the prototypes of Germans that ended up being used in 70, and the refurbished Germans, you can see 75mm guns Germans, 76mm guns Germans, up against the That's got the long barrel 88mm gun. That's done. Now this Yak Panther is painted in that late war camouflage scheme, with the idea there that it's what they sometimes call the third scheme. All the model makers love all this sort of this front line. And they started program basically cut down tanks, it looks like, for what they call the Sturm artillery. It's got a short-barreled 75mm gun on to give fire support to the infantry when they advance. This version of the Stug is a later one, a Model G. It's got the long-barreled 75mm gun on because the Germans started to realise we can use that same hull not to support the infantry but to take out the enemy tanks. So it becomes a really effective, low, look at the silhouette, it's not to be higher than order, high-speed tractor. At the end of the 1930s, much of the German multi-bank engine built by Chrysler, bolt a series of car engines on the same crankshaft, and that will work as well. Now the other things the Americans did is what's driving past now might look a bit like a German tank or like that. It's actually a slightly different design approach and the guns, and that's something called the Achilles, which the British used. We had a very good anti-tank gun with a 17-pounder, and in Britain we designed and perfected the new ammunition type, the starting Shadow, with the Fort House 10, and the discarding Shadow round inside by a 17-pounder has greater armour penetration than the 88mm we see on the Tiger. So sometimes it's the technology and the ammunition that can make a gun that much more effective, as well as just the sheer whoosh welly behind the design. It goes to the M32. The M31 version, based on the branch, like I said, when they came out of service, could have done the gun in the Tiger, so it looks like it was still impressive. In actual fact, all it's got is a wing and recovery equipment on that, so it's just a tow and take vehicles. Tiger, 30 tons is about the maximum weight limit most ports around the world have a derrick that can lift these off the ship. So that 30-ton design criteria is very purposely put together. So every time you hear people saying, oh,